Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 554 for the 2nd of June 2019. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia. Coming up on this week's show, chemtrails, contrails, condensation trails, chemical trails. We speak to Ken Mcleod, a very active part of the skeptical community here in Australia, and he is a retired air traffic controller. He's going to be talking about contrails, chemtrails, because recently, just in the last week, Ken was on national TV here in Australia to debate a US expert in chemtrails. Naturally, there'll be a link to that video in this week's show notes. What's it all about? Find out with Ken Mcleod coming up at the top of the show. Following that, UFOs, talking about things in the sky. UFOs the first 50 years. Now, this was written 20 years ago by Dr. Steve Roberts, a good friend of the Skeptic Zone. And this is from the pages of the Skeptic magazine, the journal from Australian Skeptics. And Steve takes a look on how UFO culture mirrors movie culture. How UFOs and aliens have been portrayed in popular movies, for the past 70 years, really. And aliens have certainly changed over time. Then we have an interview from the Pint of Science program, which is on at the moment in Australia. And this is an interview with Belinda Wilson, who is helping to reintroduce Australian species back into their natural habitat. And it's good to hear about these sort of things from time to time. A bit of real science, a real good story, a real feel-good story coming up on the Skeptic Zone. Now, if you're in Sydney and you like a night out, stay tuned towards the end of the show where you'll hear Maynard talk about his upcoming movie night this Tuesday night in Glebe in Sydney. And if you can't wait to hear the details, just run right now to maynard.com.au and you'll see more, and also buy some tickets. Oh, it's Maud the cat. Hello, Maud. What are you doing? You going to help me with the show? Yeah, you want to come over here? Come on. Hello, come on. Yeah. I think she's telling me... Yes? I think she's telling me she wants her breakfast. While I run downstairs and feed these cats, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Joining me now from the beautiful Southern Highlands here in New South Wales, it's Ken Mcleod. Hello, Ken.
Good evening and morning, listeners.
Good evening, good morning, no matter where you are in the world. Now, you recently went on national TV here in Australia, and I'll link to this in the show notes, folks, so you can see it for yourself, to talk about this weird topic of chemtrails or contrails, no matter what you want to call them. The show was called Studio 10, and you were up against an expert, an American expert by the name of Dane Whittington. Now, from the start, why are you so interested in these chemtrails and contrails?
Okay. My working career was in air traffic control, which had search and rescue responsibilities. And while our phone number was in the phone book, we would get lots of phone calls from members of the public accusing us of enabling the dumping of fuel over their houses, or that aeroplanes were on fire, aeroplanes were crashing, UFOs, all that sort of thing. So I became interested in what condensation trails really are. And as I moved towards the skeptics in the late 90s, I became interested in the phenomena of the Chemtrail Conspiracy Theory. And so I followed that forever. And for my sins, Channel 10 asked me to go on last week.
Yeah, it was an interesting exercise for you. But exactly what are these contrails?
Okay, well, there's two types of condensation trail. The one that you will see often when you go out to the airport on a wet day is low-flying aircraft coming into land or maybe departing will leave a very short-lived condensation trail behind them. And that's what's called an aerodynamic condensation trail. And the cause of that is the wing of an aircraft is designed to create an area of low pressure over the wing. And where you get a drop in atmospheric pressure, you get a drop in temperature. And quite often that's just enough to condense the water gas in the atmosphere into a liquid. And that'll also happen around in the vortices of aircraft sharp edges, like at the corners of flaps, ailerons, etc. Now, the condensation trail that most excites the conspiracy theorists is another one, which is the product of the burning of the fuel.
Uh-huh.
And that is called an exhaust contrail. Now, anyone who did high school science will know that if you burn a hydrocarbon, the products are CO2 and H2O, water. Now, you can do the sums on the chemical equation, but roughly for every tonne of fuel you burn, you get slightly more than a tonne of water created. Now, at low temperatures above 26,000 feet, which is about minus 35 degrees centigrade, that water molecule will condense into an ice particle. And depending on the atmospheric conditions, temperature, humidity, angle of the sun, etc., those exhaust contrails can last a very long time, and they can be dissipated over the area and can form quite a dense blanket if there's enough of them and they last long enough. So that's what they are.
Oh, I see. Yes, I remember when I used to live in Europe many years ago, looking up and seeing frequently a crisscross of these trails across the sky. But one of the things that these conspiracy theory people love to talk about is the way that humans are interfering or trying to modify the climate of the world. And I believe this is tied in closely with the chemtrail conspiracy.
Yeah, the accusation is, now you'll have to keep up here, Richard. The original conspiracy theory was that the chemtrails are actually the spraying of chemicals intended to stupefy the population, to dull us all down, to be more dull than we really are. And that was to make us docile and enable the takeover by aliens, KGB, CIA, Illuminati, etc. The conspiracy theories moved on in the last couple of years to climate modification. So we're not being dulled down anymore. It's all about altering the Earth's climate, supposedly in response to global warming. And keep up, Richard, the conspiracy theory has moved on. It's now all about spraying GMOs, genetically modified organisms, but I've not been able to find out the intent of that. So our climate is being modified, we're being dulled down, and we're being sprayed with GMOs. But I still think the Illuminati are behind us all for sure.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. Now, other people would point out to the fact that there are hundreds of photographs and videos on the internet showing aircraft spraying vapor clouds, and they seem to have nozzles and barrels and things hooked up to pipes. What's that all about?
Okay, well, there's only a couple of photographs, but and a couple of videos, but they've been repeated, reposted millions of times. There are a couple of videos. Some of the videos are the aerodynamic condensation, which can happen, as I said, at low altitudes. Mm-hmm. But the photographs and videos of the barrels in aircraft come from two sources. NASA and Boeing did a study back in the 70s of a phenomenon that had only just been detected called wake turbulence. And with the arrival of the wide-body 747, wake turbulence became a huge safety issue for pilots and air traffic controllers, and it wasn't well understood. So Boeing and NASA conducted a study which involved the spraying of water out of nozzles behind Boeing 747 to determine how exactly wake turbulence behaves. And incidentally, the surprise finding was that wake turbulence can be very extensive, can cover a large area and last a very long time. And the other phenomena, or the other group of photographs, are simply showing the airworthiness certification process with barrels of water inside a prototype aircraft. And the water is pumped around to alter the weight and balance of the aircraft. And so there's perfectly rational explanations for both sets of photographs. Now, that hasn't prevented people altering the photographs to supposedly support their conspiracy theory. And I have detected some photographs that have clearly been doctored. But there you are. That's what it's all about. Perfectly rational explanation.
Well, there's no surprise there. But why are there people then, the conspiracy people, saying that the government, the NASA and so on, CIA, for example, they say they claim they've admitted to it, or they've got experts who won't speak publicly, but it's all been uncovered?
Well, every conspiracy theory by definition requires some government whistleblower to remain covered up in the background, confirming this is true.
Yes.
But all governments have acknowledged is that, yes, they have done airworthiness certification. They have studied wake turbulence. I'm also interested in the psychology of it.
Right.
A really good conspiracy theory requires just a germ of truth. So there was spraying of a water vapour. Scientists have discussed altering the climate by putting solar shields in the atmosphere or even into orbit. But there is no program, there has never been a program of trying to alter the world's climate by spraying out chemtrails. Now, let's distinguish that from a process that began back in the 50s of cloud seeding. And that was an attempt to alter local weather by generating rain. I gather it's not been a great success, but It continues. But that is very different to the climate alteration that the conspiracy theorists are so fond of.
Now, I remember viewing the video. Oh, actually, I watched it live when you were on TV. One of the things that Dwayne Whittington did was to claim he had a general who admitted to all this in the background there. So that's something that you really can't refute on the spot, isn't it?
No, you cannot refute that on the spot. I mean, unless, all we can do is challenge them to produce this general.
Yeah.
Now, again, there was just a germ of truth in one thing he said, and he claims that scientists and climate scientists particularly had been forbidden by the US government to discuss chemtrails.
Yes.
There is a germ of truth in that the current US government has forbidden climate scientists who work for the government to discuss global warming. Now, that's a different subject altogether. Global warming exists. It is a threat to our civilization. And to my mind, scientists should be allowed to discuss these things in public forums. But the US government, for their political reasons, has banned that. So there was a germ of truth in what he said, but I think he was basically being dishonest because he waved a formatus on the TV cameras, which didn't really support what he said.
Yeah. Now, folks, I will link to this video in the show notes and you can see it for yourself. And what you and I know as gish galloping is where your opponent will just come up with endless reams and reams and reams of claims mixed in with a few facts, mixed in with a few unbelievable statements, and you are left struggling to try and combat them all, although our friend Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki likes the term garbage galloping. You'll see all that. Conspiracy theories, as we've discussed on the Skeptic Zone many times, it's like a rabbit hole, an endless warren of dead ends and false trails. And in your opinion, is there any sort of link between chemtrail conspiracy and the broader conspiracies? Are people more likely to believe in lots of conspiracy theories?
Yeah, my experience, I'm not qualified in psychology, but my experience of skepticism and science is that people who are vulnerable to one conspiracy theory are quite often vulnerable to several. And Dane Whittington, the chemtrail conspiracy leader, is also into vaccine denial and 9/11 denial, and I think he's even queried who shot JFK and that sort of thing. So at the back of all of this is a psychological makeup that, in the absence of good hard facts and a good education, tends to lean towards the simplest explanation, which quite often is a conspiracy theory. But it is an indictment on some education systems that people really don't understand basic chemistry and basic science about how an aircraft works and the fuels, what happens to the fuels when they get burnt and so on.
Well, Ken, look, thanks for filling us in on that. It was a fascinating exercise. I think you were just the right person to be on. It's a sort of a hiding to nowhere because it's so tough to debate somebody like this. I mean, we've seen this with the creationists and even the anti-vaxxers. It's a hard thing to do, and I think you did reasonably well.
Oh, thank you awfully.
But for now, and I'm sure we'll speak to you again very soon, Ken Mcleod, thank you very much.
Okay, goodbye, Richard. See ya.
Brisbane Skeptic Society, 2019 Skepticamp. That's right, Skepticos, it's time once again for our sort of annual Brisbane Skepticamp on the 9th of June. This is a free event where members of our community, you, get to present whatever topic you are passionate about. We are very excited to be at the slideshow this year. This funky venue is in the West End, but not right in town where parking is terrible. They have their own cafe on site and beers with vegan treats. Outside food is welcome, so if you don't like their options, you can get something delivered. Sounds too good to be true. There are even comfy couches if you need time out. This year we are very pleased that our friends from the Gold Coast Skeptics are co-hosting. We also have musical entertainment lined up thanks to Conspiracy of One. With many other venues the West End has to offer, I'm sure there will be a few drinks after we wrap up as well. Apply to speak. Send an email to skeptimite@bigpond.com to secure a spot. That's skeptimite@bigpond.com. Please include your name and the title of your talk, if you have a title ready. That's Brisbane Skepticamp for 2019 on the 9th of June. For more information, head to brisbaneskeptics.org or just follow the link in this week's show notes. As a teenager, I used to wear a t-shirt which I made myself, screen printing, with a little UFO on it and the words "Watch the Sky." And I'll never forget the UFO craze of the late 70s, centered around the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And this has prompted me to look through the pages of the Skeptic magazine, the journal from Australian Skeptics, to 1998, well, sometime after I was a teenager. In volume 18, number 3, on page 23, we find an article by Dr. Steve Roberts, an old friend of the Skeptic Zone, UFOs, the first 50 years. And I guess this could almost be called now UFOs, the first 70 years. Spread the fingers of one hand. Let each finger point at a different person. Count all the fingers of those people. Since the first UFO story was told, our planet has orbited its sun that many times. Those who tell the stories have failed to produce supporting evidence of adequate quality for general belief. However, not only do the stories definitely exist, they have been independently recorded for us by the movie industry. Movies, after all, reflect rather than determine popular culture. The purpose of nearly all movies is to sell tickets, rather than get some important message across. Many movies have stemmed from the UFO subculture itself. In particular, both cultures follow that of the United States of America, where 80% of reported abductions occur. Even before movies were invented, we made up stories that reflected our belief systems. Many will have played that party game where someone leaves the room while a story is told. The absent person returns and tries to establish the story by asking questions to be answered with a yes or no. But there never was a story, and the yes-no replies are actually determined by some arbitrary rule. Unaware, the questioner constructs a story anyway, and then passionately believes in it, revealing various hidden psychological obsessions to the amusement of everyone else. Movie films are a ready indicator of earthling culture and can be recalled unchanged and reviewed objectively many years later. The rewriting of history by the UFO subculture is interesting in itself. For example, the Roswell incidents of 1947-1948 were rapidly dismissed at the time, resurrected as an obscure story in about 1980, and did not feature prominently until the 1990s. Now the exploiters are making a living out of them. The half-century since Kenneth Arnold's seminal sighting of the 24th of June 1947 can be readily divided up into 6 points of time, a decade apart. Now, after half a century of this tiresome phenomenon, let us view the evidence of UFOs, aliens and their messages at each decade of the 20th century, first through the movie culture, then through the UFO reports that have wasted so much popular time and attention. In 1947, movie science fiction was in its infancy. Typical movies of the pre-UFO culture that bear the subject Flash Gordon or the cartoon Marvin the Martian, with its aliens like ourselves, spending on special effects, with small but bizarre differences. The aerial on the top of the head. Of course, the aliens came from planets with breathable atmospheres, naturally spoke English, wore shirts and trousers, and were chauvinistic towards females. They were so like us. Those very few UFOs seen before 1947, and only considered to be spacecraft since 1947, tended to be made out of everyday materials, such as wood and cloth. Ezekiel, 600 BC, saw men, wheels, and fire. The American sighting of 1897 was described and drawn as an airship, no other flying objects having been invented at the time. Not only were the materials of these primordial UFOs limited to what was well known, so was the technology, with little interest being shown by humanity in how the darn things might be able to fly. People were more concerned that the UFOs should have opening windows so the aliens could look out and maybe get some fresh air. Unlike the craft, sightings of the pre-1947 aliens stretch back to prehistory. We can include gods, devils, succubi, and ghosts. However, none of these generally had attitudes towards humanity or messages for us. After the 1947 and 1948 UFO flaps, things changed rapidly, and before the first movies on this theme came out in about 1952, the UFO phenomenon had blossomed, died down, and became a laughingstock all round. We had become UFO aware and already skeptical. By 1957, a whole swag of flying saucer films had been made, some very poor, of course, but a few, such as The Day the Earth Stood Still, have become icons of popular culture. Even now, who cannot repeat with joy, and we use the movie soundtrack,
Gord, Latu, Barada, Nikto, Latu, Barada. Nikto.
Well, perhaps some benighted people can't. Anyway, the shiny flying saucer and mighty alien robot have featured on LP covers. The posters of the film now sell at high prices, and the film is still watched with respect. The UFO reports in the 1950s tended to be of riveted, unpainted sheet metal, contemporary with our own aircraft at the time. Their technology was more accessible to our understanding, almost knowable, but just out of reach. It was the sort of thing we would have been developing 20 years later, when, indeed, electrical engineering student colleagues of mine made a look-alike flying saucer for a project. It even hovered and had moved along above a steel plate using heavy induction coils and incurring a vast electricity bill. The aliens reported, and often photographed, in the 1950s wore, like us, the neat shirts and baggy trousers and short back and side greasy hairstyles of contemporary human fashion. They also wore the same chauvinism, females being generally dismissed as insignificant by aliens and humans alike. Contemporary earthling culture included a post-war acknowledgement of military rank and power. Therefore, the aliens commanded us, and we listened with fear and respect. They had dictatorial messages for humanity, such as, "Stop fighting wars." In the movies, when this attitude got too exasperating, or on suspicion that the aliens might be communists, the Earthlings would start to shoot at the aliens with pistols. Sometimes the aliens retaliated with a ray gun and shot more accurately. By 1967, our political and social climate had changed considerably, and our UFOs reflected this new happiness. Our society was fertile for the hippie revolution, a military versus civilian schism had opened, and people asking why we had so many atom bombs when we weren't fighting any wars. A significant movie of this era was Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, which showed a new-found contempt for authority and the underlying instability of its military power, even though the audience had to draw its conclusions for themselves, since no characters in the movie stated them. The 1960s UFOs also showed marked improvements and now were typically of moulded plastic construction with smoothed, curved surfaces. Human imagination had widened so much that the UFO propulsion technology had leapt ahead and now belonged about 50 years ahead of its time, slightly ahead of what we could have now. The typical pre-hippie aliens were beautiful humanoid characters having long blonde hair and a serene expression. They wore one-piece jumpsuits made of some incomprehensible high-tech silvery material. The aliens' attitude was no longer commanding but more like advertising. We ourselves had evolved politically and were no longer ready to obey every command. They spoke in soft, reasonable voices. Messages to humanity were still patronizing, but not in an aggressive manner. "Stop testing atom bombs" reflected a contemporary obsession of our politicians and military. Sometimes the aliens offered to give their advanced technology to us if we could exhibit a bit more maturity. We were as inquisitive children playing with fireworks, handling power beyond our intellect and consequently in some great but unknown danger. Then our society moved along to 1977, and the aliens changed with us. The big movie of 1977 was actually about aliens and was called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It also gave rise to its own UFO flap. Comparing this cinematic confection with its precursors of 20 years before, it reflected a far kindlier attitude by humans to ETs and vice versa. Everybody empathized and became touchy-feely. Nobody got shot at. It was also far better made than previous efforts, and the box office returns of this investment showed that there was now big money in UFOs. The alien craft of the 1970s had evolved from mysterious shapes of plastic to realistic shapes resembling our own aircraft. We were getting fussier about our science, except that filmmakers and UFO devotees alike often forgot that aerodynamic styling is not necessary in outer space. UFO propulsion technology was understood to be far in advance of our own, based on atomic fusion, for example, the sort of thing humanity might achieve in 2100, with considerable effort. Generally, the aliens were willing to advance their advanced technology to us, and now without preconditions. In human culture, balmy theories of physics were appearing in quantity. By the 1970s, aliens had undergone a transformation from the beautiful, brainy beings towards a more grotesque form seen in the films Star Wars and E.T. It is indicative of Spielberg's genius that he depicted aliens more in the style of the latter 1980s, or that his films drove this to happen. The aliens also began to warn us instead of instructing us. Stop polluting the planet. Again, reflecting the contemporary concerns of humanity. A period of confusion followed, and by 1987 we did not really know where we were going. Culture, development, fashion, pop music, and even the UFO phenomenon all fell into a sort of suspended animation as humanity pursued a relentless greed. Spacey movies also went through a lean time, but the New Zealand film The Quiet Earth was among the better ones. This does not exhibit aliens, but rather deals with an unknown interference with nature. The central character wakes up to find all other humans have vanished without trace. Jokers said that it was made in Auckland on a Sunday. The very few aliens that were reported in the 1980s, we were too interested in ourselves, tended to be small, grotesque, naked beings invoking sympathy rather than fear. They had human-type weaknesses, which even allowed us to have condescending attitudes towards them. Recall that E.T.'s spacecraft took off without him. The aliens' attitude was more sympathetic than superior towards us, as shown by their messages, typically addressing us at the individual level instead of as part of humanity. One of the many bleeding obvious messages to us from the denizens of Thea Uber, 1987, was, "Don't trust politicians." This appeal to individuals became more detailed in later years, so that the aliens' message of the Cahill sightings of 1993 had degenerated into, "Look under the car," a touching concern over loose mufflers. Alien spacecraft were also rarely seen in the 1980s. With far better earthling technology, everybody now had a camera, and even less physical evidence for UFOs than usual. Abductees began to catch on, stories that avoid the need for evidence, and conspiracies began to be detected, stories that are actually generated and supported by the lack of evidence. The Roswell story reappeared in an obscure form as a conspiracy. Apologists were driven into saying that UFOs were a psychic phenomenon, not a physical one. And so to 1997, and what have we as the 20th century draws to a close? Contemporary movies include Men in Black and Roswell, the former being an excellent example of the art of special effects that should be seen by anyone who thinks that the 1995 Alien autopsy film might have been hard to make. The central tenet of both films is that the public are being willfully deceived by the authorities. Anyone in a uniform is now a bad guy instead of a commanding authority, and is still to be feared, but in a different way. Very few alien craft are now seen. Human technology and awareness is now so pervading and accurate that we will no longer accept false stories so readily. A convincing advertisement for a mobile telephone shows us how frustrating it would be to observe a UFO and not have this particular product readily at hand. Nevertheless, skillful UFO apologists have learned to exploit us. Stanton Freeman and many others making a living by charging $20 a seat for lectures of the same tired old material. Skillful handling of the media makes every hall fill up. There is a 1-900 number where you can report UFO sightings, or listen to them, but you pay heavily for the call. Alien technology is now taken to be far, far ahead of anything we could comprehend, but the aliens themselves have become just ordinary folk from a society remote but like our own. They reflect humanity's passions and fears, but now these have become unpleasant. The aliens have lost interest in helping us, advising us, or in sharing their advanced technology with us. They prefer instead to abduct us and investigate the naughty parts of our bodies. Despite all their wondrous technology, they still mirror our own repressed obsessions. After half a century, it has come to this: how we ignored the sage wisdom of those early aliens. They commanded us, they tried to advise us, they warned us, then they sympathized with us, and now they are abusing us. The age of innocence is over. Now, aliens are exploiting us sexually, while the UFO apologists exploit us commercially. I wish those 1950s humanoid aliens would come back. They and we would speak the same language, wear the same clothes, argue on equal terms, maybe fire a few bullets, and generally miss. And that was UFOs, the First 50 Years by Dr. Steve Roberts. And Dr. Steve Roberts is still, I think, the prime UFO spokesperson for Australian Skeptics. And you can read that for yourself, along with thousands of other articles and reports and interviews in the pages of the Skeptic magazine, the journal from Australian Skeptics, free to download at www.skeptics.com.au. Skepticon is Northern California's one-day conference for fans of scientific skepticism. Our 10th conference will have the usual science and critical thinking presentations, exhibitors, entertainment, and opportunities for the local skeptical community to meet and converse. Talks include investigating paranormal claims, the beliefs behind conspiracy theories, misconduct in scientific papers, and the incredible rise of flat Earth belief. Register now for the June 9th Skepticon 2019 at the Hyatt Regency San Francisco Hotel, just near the airport. Check the website for the speaker list, location, and other information. Skepticalcon.com.
Well, I am here at King O'Malley's Irish Pub in Canberra, and I'm speaking with Belinda Wilson. Linda, how are you going?
Not too bad, thanks. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, you just gave a fascinating talk on the reintroduction of native species into the ACT. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my PhD project is all about how to reintroduce a species, specifically a native carnivore that's been missing from the ACT for about 80 years, and that is the eastern quoll. Now, many people don't know what an eastern quoll is. It's a little bit like a smaller version of a Tasmanian devil, essentially, except instead of black and white, it's got spots. And yeah, as a carnivore, they do eat a lot of insects and small mammals and birds, but they also scavenge as well, much like the devils.
So how do you go about reintroducing a species like that?
Yeah, it's a difficult one and involves a lot of, I guess, really thinking about how you're going to approach it from a strategic point of view. And having a strategy means having a plan, and in order to achieve your goals, you want to have the right tactics. So in the first year of the reintroduction, back in 2016, we very quickly realised that, we were reintroducing them into a predator-proof sanctuary. However, it's predator-proof for the outside, not so much for little ones climbing over and going into the surrounding landscape. So some of the quolls ended up out and about outside the sanctuary. But what we realised is that the majority of those escapees were males. So in that way, we wanted to adapt our tactics. So in the second year, we brought in females only. And not only that, but they were bearing pouch young at the time of translocation, which is, of course, a little bit of a risk, but something that we thought was really worth it because it would help them to anchor to the site and establish a natal den and, hopefully just stay in Mulligan's flat and realise it's not such a bad place. And something must have worked because we ended up with about 92% survival in the second year, so better than you could ever hope for.
Tell us about what you had to do to sort of track them down when they were in the habitation area.
Oh my goodness, spent many long hours out in the boxgum grassy woodlands with a radio tracking apparatus, pinging away and just listening for where the signal was strongest. And each quoll had its own radio collar, so its own specific frequency, so we could find each individual. But I managed to radio track one. Outside the sanctuary, it had hid itself under a porch in the neighbouring community, so out the front of someone's house, and put a few traps out, and she walked right in, so we were able to get her back and put her back in the sanctuary, and that was really nice.
And what have the results been for the experiments and trial?
For the trial, so the first year we ended up with 50% survival. The second year, due to our adaptation of our tactics, we had 92%. And then in the third year, similar levels again. So we really kind of nailed those tactics. And so we're starting to move out of the trial kind of scheme of the reintroduction into the full-fledged part of it, and that's about bringing in the most genetically valuable animals as well. So some of our animals from the first 2 years came from our sister sanctuary down in Melbourne called Mount Rothwell, but nowadays we're bringing them straight from Tasmania, so the wild populations that are have really unique genetics that are not represented anywhere else.
And so what other plans do you have for this reintroduction?
Well, we're getting towards the pointy end. The last reintroduction will be happening in the next few months, and after that it'll be hands-off for the population. I'll still be, of course, out there monitoring them all, going out at 2 a.m. in the morning to go check my traps and weigh them and make sure their pouch young are progressing well. But it'll be mostly about monitoring them from this stage and seeing how they go.
Okay, thank you very much. That's excellent. Good luck.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hola, les habla Paula desde la hermosa ciudad de Buenos Aires, en Argentina. Cuando escuchamos podcasts, escuchamos los mismos que escucha todo el mundo, como The Skeptic Zone. Ojalá puedan venir a visitarnos algún día. Los esperamos con nuestras riquísimas comidas locales y hasta podemos ir a bailar un tango. Mientras tanto, sigan disfrutando de su dosis semanal de ciencia y pensamiento racional. ¡Chao!
Here's Maynard's spooky action at a distance.
We're coming to you from the Madame Frou Frou Cafe here in Glebe. I'm with Maynard. Maynard, we've got a big movie night coming up next week for Sydney listeners.
That's right. It's all evidence-based. The entire movie, I would say. In fact, I would say it's more of a documentary. The 1968 documentary Barbarella that stars James Fonda as kind of a host. You can consider her a host as she takes us through the wonderful worlds that she's looking in search of the desperately named bad guy whose name I can't say because it would give away part of the plot.
That's right. And how can people come along and enjoy this movie night, which is on which is on Tuesday the 4th? Yeah.
Tuesday the 4th. It's at Red Bar. You can get your tickets, of course, by just going to maynard.com.au. There'll be a link there to Lance Leopard and myself presenting it. See, Lance brings the camp and I bring the tramp. Basically, that's the way the show goes. And we'll be talking about the whole thing beforehand, showing a couple of shorts and just enjoying yourself. It's kind of like like watching a movie in a bar, and but we say a few things during the movie, and we kind of enjoy ourselves. And it's basically, there'll be some prizes to give away. I think I'll be dressing as Captain Kirk, because that's the best I can do. I had a look at my costumes last night, and the most Barbarella I've got is my Captain Kirk Star Trek outfit, which was made for me, so it's not a cheap one like the pyjamas. I'm wearing the good one. So I'll be there as Captain Kirk. Lance apparently wants to bring the Barbarella. He's going to wear a black silk robe and black pyjamas as well, so I don't know what he thinks he's coming as, but between the two of us we should be having a night there. We've got Barbarella, and I can now reveal that it's Barbarella this month, and next month, which will be the 2nd of July, we'll be having Flash Gordon. That's right, the 1980 Queen soundtrack spectacular Flash Gordon. That's next month, but this month, Barbarella. And then the month after that, I don't know what we'll have, but I was thinking maybe Breakfast at Tiffany's is on the cards, maybe The Princess Bride's on the cards. In fact, I made a short list. Maybe Can't Stop the Music is on. There's basically, I'm going to choose from my claptrap of crap I have at home to bring along. But, every movie we show is a classic in its own way. So I'll see you at Barbarella on Tuesday night, Sydney Skeptical listeners, and check your scepticism at the door, because there'll be a lot of non-evidence-based action going on in that movie, I think. And there's a few things that are just plain wrong in the movie as well, which is why we're showing it.
And when you do check your skepticism at the door, you'll be checking it with me, because I should be at the door to greet you when you're there. Anyway, check it out, maynard.com.au.
Yes, and on the night, Richard will be playing the part of Pygar, which will be fairly interesting.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. And for those people listening in Sydney, maybe I'll see you on Tuesday night at Maynard's Movie Night in Glebe. Also this week in Sydney we have Skeptics in the Pub on Thursday night at the Occidental Hotel just near Wynyard train station. For more information I'll put a link in this week's show notes, or you can just Google Sydney Skeptics in the Pub. And thank you to those new people who have recently joined Patreon to help support the show. Some people are chipping in $5 a month, and that is much appreciated. And it means I can keep doing the show. I can buy equipment, I can pay for expenses and things like that. And it just means that everybody, hopefully, can enjoy the Skeptic Zone. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.